friends, Ginny D here, and about a year ago I was making a video and I asked D&D players to name one thing they wished their DM did. Out of hundreds of responses, one that came up over and over was players wishing their DMs would do something with their backstory. And it makes sense. One of the things that makes tabletop games special is that they're collaborative. Players aren't just there to be an audience for the DM's story, they're there to shape it. But while the game master controls every single other part of the world, all players have is their character. That's their contribution to the story. Now, of course, not every D&D player even wants to have or use their backstory. So if you have players who just don't care about this, then obviously this is not for you. If a player takes the time and effort to create a backstory and then it never really comes up, it can feel like that contribution isn't being honored. And if you don't care about their characters, then why should they care about your game? So that's an easy solution, just use their backstories, right? Unfortunately, it isn't quite that simple, because if you handle character backstories in the wrong way, it could be even worse than not doing it at all. So let's talk about how you can make your players feel like their characters are a meaningful part of your shared story. There are a lot of ways to use player backstory. I think we can loosely divide it into 3 different approaches, or intensities. The lowest intensity is what I call the I read your backstory approach. This method is basically the bare minimum of recognizing your player's input. You can just take anything from their character history and have it appear in the game. It doesn't have to be important, it doesn't have to be plot relevant, it just has to come up. Maybe the party visits or even just hears about a location from one of the party members' past. Or a character receives a letter from a friend or family member, or meets an NPC that they have history with. In this approach, backstory elements are more like Easter eggs. They give players an opportunity to go, hey, that's me, that's my thing, without having a major impact on the game. This style might be enough for parties who aren't particularly passionate about their backstories, or for short-term games that don't allow a lot of room for personal tie-ins. Or you can use the I read your backstory approach as a first step to feel out which parts of a character's history they want to engage with. If a character runs into an old mentor and doesn't seem that interested in catching up, then you can just move on. But if they start asking a ton of questions, or suggest that they stay in touch or meet again, that might indicate that the player is interested in deepening that plotline. If you want to take it a little deeper, you can try what I call the ensemble cast approach. In television or film, an ensemble cast is when there are multiple main characters rather than a single protagonist. For example, The Avengers, The Office, and Lost all feature ensemble casts. And one thing you'll notice in episodic ensemble cast productions is that every once in a while, there will be an episode or a short arc that is particularly focused on a single character. In Futurama, for example, there's a whole episode where Dr. Zoidberg returns to his home planet to find a mate. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, there's an episode centered on Sokka training in swordsmanship with a Fire Nation teacher. Even though the full ensemble is usually present and on screen in episodes like this, the story is focused temporarily on one character, before returning to a collective story. You can do this in your D&D game too, by incorporating side quests or sessions that engage with one player's backstory, without necessarily becoming a major part of the overall plot. You basically give each player a chance to be the main character for a day. This is a relatively lightweight way to involve your players' backstories in the game, because you don't have to find a way to relate their history to the larger arc. You can just find an opening or a hook in each character's past and extrapolate it into a short quest. This can also have the added benefit of giving the whole party a little variety and a short break from whatever intense world-ending problem they're facing. To make this even easier, you can leave the decision-making to your players. You can literally just ask them what they want to pursue for their character-focused side quest. Is there a mystery they want to solve, or a task they want to complete, or vengeance they want to take? They don't need to write the whole quest, but you can absolutely ask them to give you a prompt. The last approach is the highest intensity, and for some tables could be the best. We'll explore it after a brief Lord of the Rings themed break. Hey, what game are we playing tonight? You tell me. What do your elf eyes see? The Lord of the Rings adventure book game. It's made by Ravensburger, a family-owned company that's been creating quality toys and games since 1883. We get to play through 8 chapters, each with its own unique board, completing challenges and guiding the Fellowship through the most iconic moments of Lord of the Rings. Can we destroy the One Ring and save Middle-earth? Or will the temptation of its power drive us to corruption, bringing Sauron's gaze upon us? We'll have to play to find out. Yeah, I think it's gonna be great. The rules are pretty lightweight, and since each board only takes about 30 minutes to play, you can play it in pieces over time, or all at once in one intense session. Maybe I'll get my own copy. If you do, use the code GinnyD for 15% off. And look at these cute little miniatures. Here's Frodo and Sam. Oh my gosh, Gimli! I just want to steal him and put him in my pocket. You would die before your stroke fell! Okay, back to the most intense approach, what I call the party is the plot. In this method, your characters' backstories are the foundation on which the overall game plot is built. The goals and unfinished business of the characters become the driving force of the story. This means that not only does the DM need to find loose threads in each character's backstory to spin into a larger campaign arc, they also need to be able to tie those threads to one another. If one character is hunting the mage who kidnapped their sister, and another is following a mysterious map that they inherited from their dead parents, while a third is a noble on the run after being framed for murder, it's your job to find a way to link those things. For example, maybe the map leads to an ancient lost tower that once belonged to a legendary wizard and may contain the secret to eternal life. The mage seeks the tower and knows that she can only find it with a blood sacrifice descended from the wizard, the kidnapped sister. To fund her search, the mage partnered with a power-hungry noble, but betrayed him once his usefulness ran out, pinning the murder on another. Now you have a plot that each player is explicitly connected to. They're motivated to pursue it, they have strong party cohesion over shared goals, and best of all, no matter which parts of each of their backstories they pursue, all threads lead back to the main plot. Sounds good, right? This method is undoubtedly the most difficult one to pull off because it's very dependent on the depth and theme of the backstories that your players bring to the table. In fact, while I think this method can sound like the ultimate goal, I don't think it works for every party. I would recommend this approach for experienced DMs and players who are passionate about in-depth character roleplay. But for players who feel intimidated by long, in-depth backstories or just want to give their DM a few loose concepts and then go along for the ride, I think the ensemble cast method could be more satisfying for everyone. I feel like it's also important to note that this is not 100% on DMs. There are certain kinds of character backstories that are better suited for use in-game than others. And I do plan on making a video for players about how to create a backstory that your DM can actually use. But it takes two to tango, and this video is about how DMs can tango. Regardless of which approach or a combination of approaches you want to take in your game, now is where I have to give you a warning. The only thing worse than ignoring character backstories is mishandling them. Like I mentioned before, DMs control pretty much everything about the game world other than the characters. So mess with your characters' backstories and you're stepping into the very limited area of the game where they actually have creative control. That means you need to step carefully. My rule of thumb is to treat anything that a player defines as set in stone and focus your exploration on the gaps in their backstory. This means that if a player says her twin brother mysteriously disappeared when they turned 16, you can go wild and decide that he was kidnapped by hags or ran away to become a pirate or joined a cult. But if the player says her brother joined the Kingsguard, it could be overstepping to say, well, actually, he said he was joining the Kingsguard, but instead he ran away to join a cult. And to be clear, this is a system you can communicate to your players. They can choose to define things, or they can choose to leave them open. You can check in with them about which parts of their backstory they're open to you messing with, so that you can give them fun surprises instead of unwelcome ones. You might have players who ask that you leave their character's family alone, or let their dead wife stay dead. I recently had a player whose character had amnesia, but basically told me that they weren't really interested in exploring his forgotten past. When in doubt, I will always advocate for ruining the surprise by talking with a player rather than risking making someone feel like their character is being rewritten without their consent. And even if a backstory hook isn't going to be a surprise for the player, it can still be a surprise for the rest of the party. A player and a DM keeping a juicy backstory secret together can be a lot of fun. This is where I think tools like Session Zero really make a big difference. In a Session Zero, which just means a session that happens before the game actually starts, you can ask your players about their boundaries. What kinds of topics and themes do they want to avoid in the game? I really like lines and veils for this, which is basically where you ask your player to define their lines, which are topics that they don't want to come up in the game at all, and veils, which are topics that can exist off-screen but won't be role-played or described in detail. If a player tells you that they have a line at parental death, for example, then you'll know that killing off their character's mom for a quest hook is not going to be okay. I think it's common to see these kinds of boundaries as limiting, but I would challenge you to instead see establishing boundaries as freeing. Because once you know for sure what your players are and aren't open to, then you're free to play in those open spaces without worrying about putting a foot wrong. If you want your players to feel invested in and passionate about your game, they have to feel like they've helped create it. That means collaborating with your players to tell a shared story. And if that sounds complicated, it really doesn't have to be. In fact, I found a great shortcut to making players feel invested and reducing your own labor as a DM at the same time. Check out this video to learn how.